Hello, everybody. This is Blaine DeSantis, and I welcome you to another edition of Books and Looks. That's correct, my weekly podcast where I take a look at books, talk to authors, and maybe something I've been looking at. And this week, we've got a glitch. Yep, this week we've got a little bit of an issue. I had lined up a really fantastic guest, and unfortunately, a day or two ago, he got in touch with me and told me he had COVID. Yes, he had developed COVID, and it was not going to be possible to record him. And so rather than just try to, put something together, I decided, what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and give you today one of my favorite archived episodes. It's an interview about the future of books with Peter Briscoe, a librarian emeritus out in California. If you have not heard this before, please give it a listen. Peter's a wonderful, wonderful guest. If you have heard it, I've listened to this thing 4 times myself. It's just a wonderful show. He does a fantastic job, and we talk all about books. And I'm sorry that the gentleman I had on, I think it was Sam Bush. First of all, get well, Sam. He will come back later this year and be joining us again to discuss his website, which is a really good website about mystery and suspense books. So that's one you're not going to want to miss. Anyway, I just want to tell you folks, next week we've got a really good guest. His name is Chris Wimmer. I think you want to come on there. Some people may have remembered this name. He has got a very popular podcast called Legends of the Old West. He has written his first book. It's called The Summer of 1876. It is spectacular. It was some year back then in 1876. And Chris is going to come and talk to us about all that was going on in the United States in 1876. You're not going to want to miss that. But before then, I'm sorry, but we don't have a brand new episode for you, but we have got what I think is one of the best episodes we've ever recorded with Peter Briscoe. So without any further ado, let's go to that interview. Hello, everybody. This is Blaine DeSantis, and I welcome you back for another episode of Books and Looks. And today, we've got a special interview for you today with Peter Briscoe, the author of The Bookseller. It is a short book. It is a 75-page book. It is a wonderful book, well-written, and raises some really, I think, critical issues and questions for all of us who are real readers out there. Where are we going with the fate of the book? And he's going to talk about this, college libraries, and a whole lot more in today's episode. Without further ado, we're just going to go right into that interview with Peter. Peter, welcome to Books and Looks.
Thank you, Blaine. I really appreciate your invitation. And I've been looking forward to this conversation with another bookman.
We're glad to have you on. And before we get into the actual book, could you tell everybody a little bit about your educational background and how you got into being a librarian?
I went to public schools. I'm a native Californian, Southern Californian person, and I went to public schools. And then at college level, I went to the University of California, Riverside, where I majored in philosophy and took a bunch of other classes. I was just all over the place, but my major was philosophy. And then there was a hiatus for a while where after I graduated, I worked at different jobs, just temporary things, this and that. And I'll kind of explain this in a minute, how I chose librarianship. But my next degree was a master's in library studies from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And then later, after I had been a library administrator for quite some time, I picked up a master's of public administration, again from UCR, because I was handling budgets, they're multi-million-dollar budgets, and on my signature, lots of expensive things could be purchased. And so it was wise to get as much management experience, public management experience as I could. Now, and the other thing, too, along with these degree programs, I always would take on the side language classes in French and Spanish. Those are my 2 foreign languages, but So I would always just kind of keep my hand in either in the language course or the literature courses as we went along. Now, becoming a librarian is kind of an interesting odyssey. When I was a boy, the two things I loved were geography and collecting maps, and then reading and collecting books. And the books I'm referring to were paperback, mass market paperback books. This was the period of a renaissance in mass market publishing. So you had Mentor Books, Signet, Penguin, Washington Square, and others who were suddenly publishing the entire world's literature. And I mean the world. So from Asia, there would be the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, Confucius, Tao Te Ching, on and on. And then from the Middle East, they were publishing the Quran and early histories from that period. Europe, of course, was just, we were getting everything, beginning with the classical age. And these were really cheap. I remember some only cost 25 cents, and the average was about 50 cents. And I would mow lawns and do odd chores in the neighborhood and take every dime I had and go down each week and buy more books. And my collecting kind of outpaced my reading, but nonetheless, those were my passions. So when I became college age, and I enrolled, and at first I just took a wide variety of subjects, literature, anthropology, linguistics, this, that. But the one subject which really kind of embraced what I had been doing up to that point, which was simply the pursuit of knowledge, not any particular subject exactly, just the pursuit of knowledge all over the place, the one subject was philosophy, the mother of all subjects, which embraced it. So that was my major. And then, and I liked it. And then after I graduated, I didn't really know what to do. I had a lot of different jobs until it occurred to me just that librarianship was, that it fit perfectly with philosophy. Again, the pursuit of knowledge, a completely broad look at knowledge, but from a practical standpoint of building collections and servicing with the public. So it really turned out to be the right job for me. Just took me a while to figure it out.
That's okay. You got there. Now, where were you working? What institutions did you work at?
Well, that's another thing. Once I became a librarian, I worked at just two institutions, the California State University system for 8 years, starting in Sonoma, up in wine country, above San Francisco. And then I worked for 25 years in the University of California system at Riverside, where that had been where I studied initially. So it was very nice to have a very steady employment for 32 years. And my specialization was collection development. So other specializations are things like reference or interlibrary loan or cataloging or different things. But mine was collection development pretty much straight through. And I eventually, at UCR, for 25 years, I was in charge of that function completely. I had 3 departments under me and quite a few people and a lot of money to spend. So it was a nice job.
Tell me, and this just hit me, what did you see as a difference between the Cal State system and the UC system in terms of libraries or anything else? Was there a difference?
Yeah, definitely. The Cal State system is more of a teaching institution, whereas UC is, without any doubt, a research institution. It teaches, but it's also has the special responsibility of advancing knowledge. So for a librarian or for libraries, you're given permission to really build collections in great depth that would be inappropriate in a Cal State library, even though those libraries are good.
Right. They're both large systems and they're both good systems. I'm quite familiar with them, having lived out there for 3 years. So that's very great. That's interesting to know that difference. Wow. So anyway, what got you into deciding to start writing?
Well, there again, of course, as a lot of boys, a lot of young children, boys and girls, dream about being writers, and I did too. And then after I graduated from UCR with the philosophy BA, one of the things I did, I was earning money, not a lot of money, but things were cheaper in those days. And so I went off to San Francisco for 6 months or so on my own money to just be a writer. I was going to be a writer. And what happened was I tried, but I didn't seem to have the ability to hold still at a desk. And I would go out roaming around the city, beautiful place. And at the end of the process, I hadn't written much at all. I mean, like almost nothing, because I had nothing to say. I'll be honest about that. I really had nothing to say. It was similar to an experience that Jim Harrison, one of my favorite novelists, had. We're about the same age. He went to New York City, exactly the same. He tried real hard to write. He had nothing to say, he said, and he had to go back home. And so anyway, that sort of dropped it at that point. And then as time passed, quite a bit of time, really, I had my functions as a librarian, but there was a lot of, there were things brewing, in my profession that were sort of disturbing me. And I felt they needed a response. And also, concomitant with that, while I had read hundreds of books relating to librarianship, history of printing, publishing, paper making, everything, rare book librarianship, those were all in the nonfiction field. And I really like fiction as well. Fiction has its own powers. And so when I looked around, to the fiction of libraries, I just couldn't find much that I thought was very good. The three books that come to mind that are great books, Borges's Library of Babel, of Bradbury's Fahrenheit 51, and Umberto Eco's Name of the Rose. Those are great works about the library and about librarianship that put it front and center. So many others were just saccharine, kind of silly things, idealistic. I mean, I'm leaving children's literature out because that's appropriate there. But for adults, there was just a lot of silly business about libraries. And it bothered me because the library is an institution that is 2,700 years old. It's at the university, by contrast, is 1,000 years old. So here's this very old institution, and you think, shouldn't there be a lot of good fiction relating to it? The answer is no. I decided I wanted to, try my hand at writing serious literary fiction about libraries. So that's how I got started.
By the way, just mentioning, have you ever read the book, The Bookseller of Florence by Ross King?
I haven't, Blaine, and okay. I'm aware of it, but I haven't read it.
Okay. Yeah.
Is that a good one?
Yes. It's all about the development of the books, of the libraries and the booksellers and everything else. Very good nonfiction by Ross King. As typical Ross King, though, it's extremely dense, and it takes a little longer than you might want to read that book. You got to put that down now and then, but good book. We're here talking today about your book, The Bookseller, and could you give us a little bit overview of this short story? Because it is a short story, but it's powerful. Can you tell us what it's all about?
The book is short, but it's complex. And so yesterday I jotted down a few notes to kind of get it straight in my own mind, actually. And here's what I wrote yesterday. The Bookseller consists of 5 stories, mostly set in Latin America, about professors, students, librarians, booksellers, and early scientific explorers. 4 of them are short stories, and one, the title story, a literary mystery, is a novella called The Bookseller. It takes place in an Ecuadorian library that is experiencing rampant theft, a place where some men steal books while others wonder why they bother. The underlying theme is the fate of books and libraries in the modern world, as told through the gaze of a complex and rather driven librarian, Dr. Andrés Vidal. In Vidal, we initially see a deeply frustrated librarian. His boss is an obnoxious political appointee, several notches below him in intellect. His library is poorly funded, wearing out, and maintenance mode. Yet it is still serving the public, still serving kids like he once was, thirsting for books to read, and should, with existing resources, be facilitating the research of local scholars. Fidel lives with it unhappily, but compensates by taking keen interest in the theory of librarianship and trying to define the library as an idea, as Plato might. Then, more or less by accident, a great work falls into his hands, causing a crisis in character. Here I must stop to avoid giving away the rest of the story, but as I stop, a crime investigation is underway, which will reveal that some book thieves steal to eat while others steal to save the past, vanishing as the world rushes into a post-literate future.
Tell me, Ecuador. Why did you set it in Ecuador?
I traveled pretty extensively in Latin America, and Latin American studies has been one of my major interests for throughout my career. I really like that field and like the people in it. There's a lot of scholar librarians in that area. And so I traveled in Latin America. I purchased books down there and then just gone as a traveler. And Ecuador in particular, I've been there a few times. I wanted to set, one of the things I try to do in writing is give myself some distance so I have more room to maneuver and at a certain perspective that if I put it right, say in LA or someplace like that, I wouldn't have. And the Bookseller, while I am talking about Latin American libraries in it, I'm also talking about American libraries, very much so.
Okay, that's what I wasn't aware if there was a parallel with our libraries here.
Right. And so, but it gives me a chance to explore that subject without somebody's, a reader saying, hey, stop, I disagree, blah, 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 and not seeing the argument to the end. Set in Ecuador, just everybody has more freedom to think about it.
I love that it was down there, and it brought out some really interesting things and books going missing, etc. And it's just, it's fascinating. That leads us into the whole question of the library. What's happening to libraries and the physical books, both on the college level as well as on our local library level?
Well, we're well into a revolution in the medium that is dominant in the library. For 3,000 years, it's been either scrolls or the codex. And in the last, say, 3 or 4 decades, it's been electronic books rapidly taking the place of print books, at least for new publications. And this is, I was part and parcel of that because I was, as a collection development officer, I met with my peers at the other campuses, and we would spend millions of dollars on cooperative acquisitions, and they became almost entirely electronic. Here's the problem with that. At that point in time, the Encyclopedia Britannica, most libraries replace that every couple of years, get a new edition. It cost around $800 at that time. They brought out the electronic version, $8,000 per campus. $8,000. And at that time, our budgets were almost frozen. And I would say, hey, come on, let's think about this for a minute. Did your budget rate, go up by 1,000%? Mine didn't. It went up by 3%. That was one instance. Then there were scientific journals that were as high as $45,000 a year, $25,000 a year. I mean, these were unbelievably expensive, and yet our budgets were the same, or basically the same. So the way it was paid for was there was just massive cancellation of journals in the humanities, the arts, and many of the social sciences. They were just sacrificed. And hundreds of journals went completely out of business because, the library stopped subscribing, all to pay for these very necessary and very important scientific journals. But the whole, half of the campus just got whacked. And humanists have always said that the library was their laboratory. But now they didn't have the laboratory anymore, the library. And that was another imbalance that was taking place at the university that alarmed me a great deal.
It's interesting. It goes down into the public school system with this push for the STEM programs.
Right.
If you want to be a poet, I keep saying, where are the next poets coming from? Where are the historians coming from? Like you say, the philosophers. No, we're going to put our money into STEM. Not everybody can be a STEM person, or wants to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Now,
and then,
go ahead.
There's really, if you want me to, there's a little more to it too.
Go ahead.
Another problem with this revolution to ebooks, there's really three things that are worrisome about ebooks. First of all, let me explain. At this point, I think they're here to stay, and I also think print books are here to stay. But I would, if you make them dominant, if they become the entire content of your new collection, the three problems are the effect on reading, the effect on long-term preservation, and the effect on libraries themselves. Now, just very briefly, basically, digital reading, it's been shown in many scientific studies, reduces comprehension and retention. And it tends to make people skim rather than do deep reading. And there's that problem that's widely recognized of a shorter and shorter attention span. So that's what's going on in a sense with the reading problem. The problem of long-term longevity is that print books can and do last for hundreds of years. You can pick up a book that's published in 1600s and you can read it perfectly if you read Latin or something. But ebook has a longevity about 10 years, and then it is just worthless because of the changes in media and software, hardware. Everything's changing continuously. It's the name of the game in technology. And so you have to constantly renew it, constantly migrate. And libraries don't always have the money to do that. Finally, the effect on libraries is that these books, in a way, the common saying, out of sight, out of mind.
Uh-huh.
Well, ebooks, to a great extent, in large quantity, are out of sight, and libraries they set up standing orders with distributors, and they just dump them by the hundreds and by the thousands. And librarians are kind of losing track of what's in their own institutions. So it's got to...
I like one of your characters who I think said something to the effect that all the knowledge and all the books of the world are on the digitalized and nobody reads them. No one can find them.
Right. That's one of the results. It's overwhelming, and it violates what a library is trying to do, which is help people find knowledge, not just give them an endless supply of records. So one thing that's very worrisome, and I'll just mention this too, the last thing, by going whole hog on ebooks, you're risking one of the most important functions of librarianship, which is the preservation of knowledge for society throughout time. And there was an article in the New Yorker a few months ago entitled "The Surprisingly Big Business of Library Ebooks." And it says that at the New York Public Library, they are shifting almost all of their multi-million-dollar acquisitions budget to digital content. Well, for me, I I almost feel this is culturally insane, because to trust preservation of recorded knowledge to private businesses who actually are the ones that you're leasing this from, whose motive is profit and who never last very long. Businesses always, or not always, but they go to bankrupt, they're bought out, they disappear. If your books are in the hands of these companies, they're gone if that happens. And a library has a responsibility to society to be the one that, keeps this stuff for the public. So that's my thoughts on that.
Well, I concur with you on that. I really do. I know my daughter's last stop was at a public university here in South Carolina, and they got the word that they were going to start digitalizing everything. And that means we can cut back on employees, we can cut back on space, we can make the space into something else. And do you think that's also part of what's driving the digitalization by the universities?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Library buildings are expensive. They're big. And even, expanding the library is very expensive. And it's, in the case of many top administrators, it just isn't their highest priority. The football team might be a higher priority, or, buy more, putting in more laboratories, which is really very important. Now, all these things are important. But what's happening now is, there's turnover, and so every so often the library has to hire a new director. And I can imagine the conversation, with the president of the college or the board that's, choosing people, and they get to say, we have a problem here. The library is just so packed, and they're calling for a new building. Do you have any thoughts on that? And this person says, of course. He says, no problem. He says, you don't even need to worry about getting a new building. We're going to shrink the collection, even with ebooks. Uh-huh. At that point, they found their new director.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's...
You mentioned that, I think, in your prior book, The Best Read Man in France, where the new bibliographer became a digital resource director.
Uh-huh.
And that's exactly the same thing. She was moving everything to digital. That's a wonderful book also for those of you who get a chance. The Best Read Man in France by Peter Briscoe. Very good book. Again, makes you scratch your head a little bit about what's going on out there. What about public libraries? What's your thought on that? Are they becoming obsolete, Peter?
I think public library. What I feel is that almost all libraries, except maybe for the richest research libraries like Harvard or Princeton or something of that sort, Stanford, almost all libraries are out of balance at the moment. And instead of having a good balance between print and digital, they've shifted it over almost completely to the digital, very close to it at least. There's a fallacy to some extent. Digital is wonderful. People my age, you can increase the size of the type. That's probably, for me, the best single thing about it. And there's other virtues. You could go through a long list of why digital's good, but it should, in my opinion, remain an auxiliary to print, because, as we know, if it isn't as effective a reading medium as print. And so what I think is happening is that they're kind of turning their back on the serious reader, like the little kids like me when I was 7 years old or something. And instead, they're reducing the size of their collections, and they're just filling it up with computers. And they have big spaces for exercise programs and meetings and so forth, making it into a big community center. I have nothing against community centers; they're wonderful. I just don't feel that the library should be sacrificed, the library part of it, to the community center. Let's have both.
Wasn't there a lady who wrote a book about the library in Los Angeles after it had burned down?
Right.
I remember that book. But just called The Library, I think.
I did read that one, right.
And again, it was all they were doing to change the library.
That's it. and that's the whole, that was the book, right?
Man, that's another very, very fine book.
So what happens if you do this, after a while, you've sort of cut the real serious readers and the people that have supported the library through the centuries out. You know, that there's almost no reason to go down there if the collections keep dwindling. Most people have computers at home, or many people have computers at home. They don't need to go to the library to use them. And so that isn't a big attraction for many people. Well, I'm not opposed to having computers in a library, of course. There should be a lot more. So I do feel that I think that the librarians, they've made a large mistake, which I hope is corrected, is by thinking that ebooks are going to replace print books instead of having both just ad infinitum into the future. And if they would get back in balance, they would thrive.
One of the points I think that one of your characters made in the Bookseller was the lack of attention span of this recent generation or so. And I'm currently watching two programs. One is the remake of All Creatures Great and Small, set in the 1930s in Yorkshire over in England. And at nighttime, many a time, they'll show a scene of everybody sitting around reading a book. Okay. Then my kids have gotten me this. They say, Dad, you have to watch Emily in Paris. So now I'm watching Emily in Paris. There never is a book. Never a book. Everything's a text. Everything's a tweet. Everything's boom, 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 boom. And there's nothing there. There's no substance there. And I worry about this generation of readers.
I really do too. Back in 1985, Neil Postman wrote a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And that was even before ebooks were around. But he was thinking of television and a lot of other things where there was just this shift into just people amusing themselves to death instead of, getting a little serious and trying to learn more, whatever it might be. I think it's only growing worse when they look, they've done a lot of studies looking at how students use their time, 24 hours.
Right.
And it turns out that the part for reading is tiny, just tiny. Even studying homework is rather small, but because they're spending so much time on social media and whatnot, or TV or this or that. And you can see what's going to happen. I mean, they could have the highest IQ in the world, but if they're only devoting 10 minutes a day to reading.
I remember one of my old history professors. He was one of my favorite professors. And then when I moved back into this area, South Carolina, working up in Pennsylvania with my dad, I saw him again. And he said to me, Blaine, we've got students with the highest SAT score we've ever had, and they don't know a damn thing about anything. And it's true. They don't read. They don't know anything. And it's, I don't know. It's a shame that these kids learn for a test. They don't know anything else other than what's on the test. Now, my daughter, the librarian, wants me to ask you this question. All right. And she and I go back and forth on this. Is an audiobook a book?
I feel it is myself, even though I don't use them or listen to them too often. In fact, my problem is that when I listen to an audiobook, it sort of lulls me into sleep. And, but if it's well done, it's like, a new chance of enjoying the text. Now, I think it's really great when you've read it once and then you listen to an audiobook and you kind of get some different feelings by hearing it read to you. So my feeling, yes, it is. And for people who have complete, sight impairment, it's a godsend.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah. So I've always thought if I lost my sight, I would go right to audiobooks.
Well, my wife, who was born and lived in Romania for 20 some years and speaks English very well now, but she still has a problem with reading some of these books, and so she listened to The Lincoln Highway, and absolutely loved it. And even this morning was telling me facts from that book, which I didn't remember, and I read the book. And some people just, they get it better orally. And my wife really enjoyed that audio experience so much more than I would have, because I'm like, you either fall asleep or I forget what they say. Oops, don't know when there was that. And that's the trouble I have with ebooks too. You can't quickly go back and find anything.
No.
Not like a book where you can open it up and, oh, yeah, page so-and-so. And I got to go back to the page and right. And I remember one time I was telling my wife a story from the book Texas by James Michener. And I said, the author Michener was making this point at a certain point in his book. I hadn't read the book in over 20 years. I went over within around 30 seconds. I'd found the area, the quote, and everything else. And same thing, the book he did the Covenant. I said exactly where I saw. I was showing her what he was writing. You can't do that with an ebook. Impossible.
Actually, scientists believe that's a major reason why the retention is lower with ebooks, because the mind uses space to store its sort of data, and it's a certain spatial aspect to it. And what happens with an ebook is it's got kind of a constant scroll, or even if it's set up as a page turner, if you change the size of the type, the pages completely shift and are the same. And so what happens is the mind kind of gets lost in it. You can read it and you can comprehend it as you're going, but you can't go back and find it easily, where with the printed book you can do that very easily. And then when you're trying to actually take a test and remember it, it's much, the mind doesn't pull it up the same way, because it's actually subliminally remembered where the knowledge was.
Right. And I have people I know down here who are in positions on the school board who rave about the fact that, all our kids now get a tablet. They don't need the book anymore. They can do it all on a tablet. Mm-hmm. Okay. We'll see how they turn out. Anyway, let me ask a couple other things. What about self-publishing? You think that's going to help business, or you think that's going to help the rise of the books?
I think that's a really good question with pros and cons. I think the current commercial publishing setup is extremely difficult to crack. I mean, it's so hard to obtain, for example, an agent, and then for the agent to sell the book, that it really discourages people. I mean, it's often a multi-year process, and you come up with a goose egg. You didn't get anything anyway. So I do believe that self-publishing really is the answer there for a person that just can't penetrate the system. It doesn't have a friend who knows an agent, doesn't have a friend who knows a publisher who's already published. Just the beginning author, or they can do it themselves. And there have been actually quite a number of self-published books that have become huge hits and been even repurchased, taken over by commercial publishers and printed again. And so it's a way in. Also, well, that's the main, I think, plus. The other part of course, is it's just let loose a lot of people who aren't very good writers. I mean, you hate to say it, but it's true. They're just, they just throw something against the wall and hope it sticks, and it doesn't. So there's a lot of mediocrity in self-publishing, as well as really, really good books. So again, it requires discernment. And I would say, like, a program like yours is so helpful to people in sorting the wheat from the chaff and giving them, a heads up about a book that, in that category or something like it, whether it's published commercially or not. It helps them, find their way to good stuff. But it's a bigger job now than ever.
It is. It is. And last week we had on a gentleman named John Constable, who is, I don't know how old John is, maybe in his early 60s, but, he had a long journey himself to get his book out there. And I know finally he ended up self-publishing it himself, and he felt he had more control over his book than if he had gotten a publisher to be doing things.
Absolutely true.
Sam Sachs, who writes a column in the Wall Street Journal on books, last week, I think it was, said that there is a dearth of mid-list authors, that the publishing companies no longer want authors down the line. They only want those stars, the
Right.
James Pattersons who put out 22 books a year, and that's what they want nowadays. And so it makes it almost impossible for a new voice to crack.
I couldn't agree more. And that's why self-publishing is crucial. And then they want long books. I speak this as a person who sort of stylistically is concise, but in Europe, the novella is a very accepted form, and you find them all over the bookstores in Paris and other European cities. Just 100-page books, 85-page books, completely accepted. In America, it's generally felt that the book must be at least 250 pages so they can charge $25 or $35. That's the main reason to charge more.
Yes.
And so what happens is a book that might have been brilliant at 100 pages becomes bloated and repetitive and boring at 250 pages.
Or longer. Yeah. Oh my. So we just go on and on and on. And I used to like Ken Follett's books, but my God, they get longer and longer all the time. And they're interesting, but my God, 1,000 pages all the time. Oh, yeah, it's too much for me. I can't remember.
And you can spot that it's been, it's padding, and I resent it because time is precious.
Yeah, it's the middle. You can always tell the beginning's good, the end's good. It's in the middle. They just are dying because they don't know what to write. They're just filling prose or, just putting background in that's not necessary. So, yeah, it's a problem out there. But like you said, it drives the $29.99 cover price.
Mm-hmm.
Can't do that if the book's only 120 pages long.
Mm-hmm.
I'm told that you have been personally responsible for 1.5 million books being donated to the library. How did you do this?
Well, they weren't all donated. That I should really correct that. Most of them were purchased, but there were some huge donations in addition. I mean, like just one example, one donation consisted of 5,000 books on gardening. I mean, it was a wonderful collection on gardening. And I just, grabbed it, That was just one little example of many such collections. By the way, a lot of libraries today absolutely do not accept books that way for their collection, although they will accept them to resell them. But they don't want them for their collections because they're books.
That's right.
Hard, but anyway, so the way it works, most of those were acquired book by book, frankly. I had a staff of bibliographers, very well-educated people, often spoke several languages or the appropriate languages, and subject specialists, and we just methodically combed the book world, matching it to the research and teaching needs of our institution. And we would buy, book by book by book. And I would say probably of the 1.5 million, that probably 1.25 million were all purchased. And it was it cost us about 75 million or something like that to buy that many books. So
I'm glad you got them, and that's really great. And I'm also told that you are not the only book collector in the family.
No, my wife, obviously that's one reason I fell in love with her. She's a great reader and a great cook. And so as she brought me up from ignorance when it came to food. And of course, she used cookbooks and collected cookbooks. And so it's just growing and growing. And at the moment, we have about well over 700 cookbooks.
Oh my, that takes up the whole wall by itself, doesn't it?
It actually takes up several walls. And some are some sections of it where we sort of specialize are really quite good and have a lot of hard to find materials.
Uh-huh.
But it's nice because if you have we look at cooking and dining and food as a very interesting subject, not really something you enjoy eating, but it's a subject in itself. So if we have any questions about food, we can just walk to our library and usually answer them.
My wife's got around 200 of them, and she can never find anything we need. And her answer is now, put this down on your note. Make a note about this. And now I got to look through everything to find out where something is at. So, but it's wonderful. I'm glad you share that interest in everything. Hey, Peter, I don't want to take any more of your time. I'm going to tell you this, though. I'm hoping that maybe later on this year we can get back together again and chat some more about books and libraries and where we're going and what we're doing. And by the way, is there another book on the horizon from Peter Briscoe?
Well, I've read a total of five that are published, and I'm working on some new stuff. But it's at this point it's in the distance. So
okay.
That's all I can say. And Blaine, thank you so much for inviting me and for allowing this wonderful conversation. I really do appreciate it.
I'm glad we could do this. And friends out there who are listening, and it's Peter Briscoe, Briscoe. The current book is called The Bookseller, but I also recommend you take a look at his book, The Best Read Men in France. You're going to be able to get through both of these in a night, each one. And they're wonderful books. They make you think, and they're just well written. And gosh darn, I'm so happy, Peter, you could be on. And with that, everybody, I'm going to say thank you. And Peter, thank you. And we'll come back with more after this. I don't know about you, but I certainly learned a lot about books after talking with Peter Briscoe today. And I thought it was such an important topic that I did not want to, sully it with any of the things that I read or any. I know I'm not going to sing for you today like I did last week, so we don't want that. But anyway, Books and Looks, it's here every week, and I refer you to that podcast as well as to my website, which is viewsonbooks.com. That's right, and the Greenville Podcast Company. Folks, we can't forget my chief cook and bottle washer, my son, my producer, Nathaniel DeSantis. Whew, I'm telling you, getting calls and references from all over about this. So anyway, hey, listen, thanks to the Greenville Podcast Company, thanks to viewsonbooks.com, and for Books and Looks, this is Blaine DeSantis saying so long.